They called it homecoming, but for me it felt more like walking into a courtroom without walls. Gravel murmured under my shoes as I crossed the drive. Spring dusk pressed to the windows. The dining hall gleamed like a gavel before it falls. Portraits watched from gilt frames. Silver candlesticks threw twin blades of light across glass and forks. Charles held court at the head posture like a flagpole. Diana moved like a trained tide smoothing napkins, smoothing stories. Aunt Rose sat near the end face, careful sympathy rising and receding as if it feared being seen. Evelyn shone at the center. Emerald silk practiced laugh palms cupped to receive praise as if it were sacrament. "Our Evelyn, my father," said the daughter who carries the Whitmore legacy. The room hummed agreement, a tidy verdict signed in nods. I sat where the light thinned and let the verdict pass over me. Memory tugged last Thanksgiving the toast that leapt around my name as though it were a pothole. I lifted my glass with a soldier's reflex and swallowed the echo of applause that did not include me. "Tomorrow will be transcendent," Diana said, lacing a hand around Evelyn's wrist. "A platform, not a finish line." "Do try not to fuss with logistics," Charles added to me without fully turning. "Let the staff handle the little things." Little things. The words fell light as ash. I folded a linen corner once, twice. The candlesticks mirrored Evelyn's smile. Two slender flames climbed it like climbers taking a summit photo. Evelyn listed admirers, a dean, a donor, an adjunct moved to tears. "Leaders make people feel seen," she concluded. "Precisely," my mother said. "And to be seen, one must be somewhere worth looking." Diana leaned toward a guest voice, silked but pitched to carry. "Victoria's work is admirable, service always is, but it's transitional. Evelyn's work builds foundations." The sentence floated like perfume and stung like it too. I said nothing. Silence can be a corridor you walk until the door you need appears. Dessert plates arrived, the air sweetened with lemon. Evelyn rose before the coffee bracelets chiming. She raised her glass chin lifted to include the portraits. "To the program," she said, savoring the vowels. "To the donors and the dean and the hours that led to this. To legacy." She turned and the chandelier braided itself through her smile. "And to Victoria," she added lightly, "who serves coffee for generals." A beat. Then laughter broke like a neat wave on stone. Charles shook his head. Diana's laugh arrived on time. Aunt Rose's napkin slid from her lap and lay like a surrendered flag. She didn't reach for it. My water glass drew a ring on the linen. The candles held thin-shouldered flames, steadfast as sentries. They wanted a response to finish the joke. My silence joined the table like an unexpected sixth course. Beneath it, something older breathed the desert at dawn, rotors distant as surf boots on gravel, the weight of names I carried and could never set down. I set the glass aside and found my breath where I had left it in the center of my chest, a steadying stone. I met Evelyn's eyes until her smile's edge stopped climbing. I did not. They thought silence meant defeat. They forgot silence can also be a blade. Every toast in that house was a verdict. Every laugh was a nail. The night air was cooler than the dining room's suffocating glow, but it carried the same weight. Lanterns strung through the Whitmore estate's garden flickered like jury lamps, swaying with each hint of wind. The stone path wound between manicured hedges that had been trimmed so ruthlessly not a single branch dared grow out of line. Even the roses seemed disciplined, standing at stiff attention in rows that reminded me more of formation than fragrance. I slipped outside the taste of Evelyn's mockery, still bitter. My bronze star remained where I had left it, buried in a trunk far from these walls, gathering dust instead of respect. Out here, with shadows stretching across the lawn, the thought pressed heavier than the metal itself. It wasn't the absence of recognition that stung. It was the deliberate blindness of those who could never see beyond their chosen heir. Voices followed me into the garden because Evelyn never allowed a stage to remain empty for long. She drifted across the flagstone's emerald fabric, brushing her ankles, carrying a glass she barely sipped. Her words arrived before she did. Rivermont University, she announced to no one, and everyone invited me to give the valedictorian address. Can you imagine 1,000 graduates and their families listening to me speak about resilience, vision, the Whitmore legacy? She laughed soft enough to feign humility, loud enough to ensure the servants within earshot repeated it later. Charles's chuckle was slower, but it carried the weight of a gavel. You've always had that aura, Evelyn. When you walk into a room, people sense possibility. Future senator, future leader. Not just applause, but influence. He tilted his chin toward me, as though comparing portraits, one gilded, one cracked. I leaned against the iron railing near the roses, letting my silence answer. Evelyn's reflection twinkled in the lantern glass. She held her shoulders back, waiting for more praise. Diana delivered it neatly like a closing argument. You'll set a standard tomorrow. Victoria, she added, eyes sharp even in half-light. Remember not to embarrass the family. It's Evelyn's moment, not yours. Keep your practicality away from the spotlight. Her voice thudded into me harder than Evelyn's taunts. The word practicality tasted like dismissal, like all my deployments. My months in sand and dust were no more than errands. I held the railing tighter, nails pressing crescents into my palm, choosing stillness over reply. Aunt Rose lingered by the fountain, shawl wrapped around her shoulders. She didn't add to the chorus, but she didn't interrupt it either. Her silence was different. Less weapon, more wound. Her gaze flicked toward me once, then away, as if she knew siding with me would break the balance and cost her place at the table. Evelyn turned back, her smile polished to match the silver still clinking behind the dining room walls. By the way, Victoria, that uniform of yours. The fabric never looks right. Too stiff, too plain. It must be hard spending your life in something so cheap. She let the word cheap dangle, gleaming like a hook. I didn't bite. Instead, I reached for my phone as it buzzed, a vibration so precise it felt rehearsed. One message lit the screen. Colonel Grant LZ secured. Await your word. The glow of the text cut brighter than the lanterns, a reminder that my world was not theirs. While Evelyn polished speeches and Diana rehearsed warnings, others prepared in silence, ready for signals they trusted I would give. I slipped the phone back into my pocket, heat from the screen lingering against my palm. My breath left in a slow, steady line. I bent closer to the roses, letting my whisper vanish into petals before anyone else could hear. Not yet. The campus smiled at Evelyn. It barely blinked at me. Rivermont dressed in navy and gold, banners from lampposts, press booths along the track, a stage with undecided microphones. Wherever Evelyn moved, the air tipped toward her as if the campus had been told which way to face. Parades taught me this choreography. Applause skims a line like weather brief, impersonal. I kept that lesson like water in a canteen. Evelyn took the rehearsal stairs with an actor's timing, planted herself on tape marks, lifted her chin until silence arranged itself. Resilience, she began. Vision. Responsibility. Heels clicked from plywood. I'm here because people believed in me, because community makes capacity. She glanced at the empty VIP row, practicing gratitude for donors not yet seated. We don't measure legacy by medals, but by the lives we uplift. The mic popped. She smiled through it. Dean Walker hurried to the footlights, clapping. Strong cadence, perfect length, he said. Presence. Inevitability. Tomorrow, breathe on legacy. Let it own the stadium. He slid past me with a polite, empty grin. Thank you for accompanying, he offered as if I were a cello case. I nodded once. I set my canvas tote beneath the bleachers. Along the strap, tucked in the stitching, a subdued geometry slept rank, made quiet on purpose. Stars don't shout, they bend light. I mapped sightlines by habit, gate to stairs, tunnel, to press pen the gap between the power cart and the nearest clear path. Evelyn polished a transition until it gleamed. She caught me watching and tilted a smile. Try not to look like security detail tomorrow, she called. People get nervous when uniforms stand near microphones. I'll make every effort to be forgettable, I said. She laughed for the crew. Again, Dean said please to hear his own authority. She obliged voice pouring into practiced radiance. Dr. Miller came up the aisle with the gait of a man who once carried weight for distance heel, set knee, soft eyes, half a beat ahead. He would have passed, but his attention snagged for a heartbeat on the hidden geometry along my strap, not the coat, not the face, the pattern. Knowledge recognizes what fashion misses. No theatrics. He set the programs down, straightened his shoulders, and folded a quick private salute no wider than the air between us. He converted the gesture into a rub at his brow and moved on. A golf cart circled with folding chairs. Interns tested the teleprompter. Cut grass mixed with warming cables. The stadium hummed like a hive sure of its queen. Evelyn finished thank you and stepped down to receive applause from people hired to clap. Passing me at the rail, she brushed my sleeve as if dusting a shelf. Get some sleep, she said. Big day for the family. Make sure your practicality doesn't wander onto the stage. Practicality goes where it's needed, I said. She performed not hearing. Dean orbited her. A cameraman adjusted a lens already adoring. I lifted the tote. The strap settled into the groove my shoulder remembers. Across the field, Dr. Miller paused at the tunnel, adjusted his stance ghost of the salute, then disappeared. Rivermont smiled along Evelyn's path. Fine right. Let it. Some smiles are confetti bright, weightless, swept by morning. Others arrive later when the wind changes. I checked my watch. The exit's the ground. The story still read the same. I let the corner of my mouth lift not a grin, just a quiet exchange across a long room where recognition travels by semaphore rather than cheer. One saw. Soon they all will. Evelyn's laughter could cut glass. That night it did. The banquet hall at Rivermont swelled with chandeliers and voices, the air thick with perfume, ambition, and money. Polished oak tables gleamed under linen wine glasses, catching the light like scattered prisms. Donors leaned into one another, murmuring about scholarships and campaigns. Faculty lined the room's perimeter, eager to be remembered. My parents stood close to the stage, framed like a portrait of pride. It reminded me of the Thanksgiving table months ago, the same choreography, the same distribution of applause, except now the room was larger and the stage higher. Then they toasted Evelyn and left my name unsaid. Tonight they had an entire university to help them forget me. Evelyn commanded the center as if born to it. Her gown shimmered with subtle sequins, a calculated nod to celebration without excess. Every gesture drew light. When she touched her champagne glass, a hush fell. When she smiled, the room leaned. She didn't need permission, she gave it. To community, to legacy, to the future, she declared, raising her glass. Applause punctuated the air. Dean Walker nodded like a metronome. Charles clapped with the satisfaction of a man who believed he had invested well. Diana pressed her pearls with 2 fingers as if steadying joy. Then Evelyn's gaze found me standing near the back metal ribbon looped tight in my pocket. Her lips curved into something sharper than charm. And to my sister, she added, voice sweetened with mockery, who serves paperwork. The donors chuckled. A few laughed outright, relieved at the permission. My father's shoulders shook with amusement. My mother's eyes glowed pride refracted through Evelyn's cruelty. Aunt Rose flinched just enough for me to notice. Her hand hovered at her glass but did not rise. Heat pressed against my throat, but I held still. The ribbon between my fingers dug into skin, a quiet anchor. My bronze star lay heavy at the end of it, hidden, unseen, gathering dust in memory. Evelyn's words ricocheted inside the hall, and every laugh felt like another nail in the invisible coffin they had built for me. She lifted her glass higher, her laughter rising like crystal struck too hard. The sound rang across the chandeliers, brittle and cutting, Conversations dissolved into her rhythm. Even the waiters paused mid-step. Evelyn had them all, faculty, donors, family, dancing to her cadence. My breath came shallow. I turned the metal ribbon once more in my palm, metal pressing against my lifeline. I thought of deserts where silence meant survival, of nights where stars didn't shine, but burned unseen against black horizons. I had carried weight Evelyn could not imagine yet. Here her joke became the truth people chose to believe. The glass in my hand was sweating with condensation. My grip faltered. A thin squeak cut the air as it slipped, then fell. Time broke open. Crystal struck marble, shattering. Shards scattered across the floor like frozen light. Conversations collapsed into silence. For a moment only, the echo of breaking remained, slicing the air sharper than Evelyn's laughter. Dozens of eyes swung toward me. Waiters froze mid-step. Donors blinked as if unsure whether to laugh or gasp. Evelyn's smile stalled, her expression stiffening into something that almost looked human. My parents exchanged a quick glance. My father's brows raised, my mother's lips pressed thin. I bent slowly, not rushing, not excusing. The fragments glittered under my fingertips, tiny mirrors reflecting a distorted version of the hall. Aunt Rose was the only one who moved toward me, but she stopped short, her unease hanging like a shadow between us. I did not look up. I did not apologize. I let the silence grow longer, heavier, denser than any toast could carry. A silence thick enough to feel. A silence they had once weaponized against me. And in that silence, I whispered inside myself, steady and cold, tomorrow silence will be theirs. Every great reversal begins in shadows. The hotel room felt like a bunker carved out of silence. A single lamp burned low, throwing a square of yellow across the desk where my bag lay unzipped. Inside, not clothes, but order, a hardened handset, a slim folder stamped Exord, a folded map of Rivermont's stadium with grease pencil marks tracing routes. The air smelled faintly of iron, as though it had already been cut by blades waiting to arrive. The message from earlier still rang, LZ secured. Await your word. Grant never wasted syllables. I powered the handset encryption, scrolling like a heartbeat, keys exchanged, line locked. The folder slid open, one page heavy as any verdict, 1100 hours west quadrant, 5 knots southerly winds. Authentication phrases, abort codes, fallback timings. Signatures underlined destiny, mine among them. I set each mark against the map. If the dean started on schedule, if Evelyn leaned into her dramatic pause, applause would crest at 10:58. That sound would cover the approach, cameras would swing, and the ground would shift from hers to no one's. A clean battlefield. Not home, not haven. Just ground. Other maps flickered through me, valleys where convoys bled for misjudged angles, wadis wide enough to swallow units, whole tents where pushpins moved, while generators coughed. Ambushes turned to victories because patience held longer than pride. Lessons, not trophies, never confuse noise for strength. Let arrogance burn itself empty. Tonight I rehearsed them like prayers. I laid out tomorrow's uniform piece by piece. Jacket, pressed shoes, plain insignia still wrapped in tissue. In the tote, the ribbon and medal waited. I didn't touch them. Some burdens stay sheathed until silence itself sharpens them. The handset vibrated once, twice. I answered. Grant's voice was steady as a metronome. Birds on standby. Tomorrow, 1100, copy, I said. Wind southerly light. Courtesy notice filed, override secured. Extraction for one. For one, I echoed. Respect traveled inside those two words, heavier than applause. The LZ sightline clear. They built their day for cameras. We'll use the cameras. I let a pause confirm it. Too long coming, I murmured. He said nothing more. Nothing more was needed. Afterward, the room seemed smaller, pressed by inevitability. On the notepad, I sketched the sequence 10:50 seating, 10:56 processional, 10:58 the pause, 10:59 the rumble mistaken for weather. Allies, Aunt Rose's conflicted eyes, Dr. Miller's salute. Risks, Evelyn's instinct for spectacle, my parents' hunger for control. Mitigation's timing, terrain, the weight of truth itself. I stood at the window. Stadium lights glared like an operating theater ready for incision. The stage tomorrow would be high ground, narrow ridge cameras as fixed weapons, crowd as tide. I traced their drift on the glass with my finger donors. Right students, left press, pivoting like compass needles. Anxiety never came. Clarity did. The plan nested in my bones, steady as march rhythm, steady as rotor thrum. If Evelyn required worship to exist, I required only stillness. Her laughter could not reach here. Even the hum of the hallway ice machine slowed as though listening. I closed the folder, dimmed the handset. On the desk, the notepad bore its single underlined word, witness. Not one to shout, but one to know. That would be enough. I breathed once, twice, and gave the only order required. Execute. Camera pans out hotel window, reflecting campus stadium lights. Faint hum of rotors in distance. War taught me to fight in silence. Gather weight and strike when arrogance is loudest. The stadium at dawn breathed like a hollow lung. Rows of empty bleachers climbed into the gray, each seat waiting to become a juror. Flags flapped against the bleached sky, their edges snapping like distant rifle fire. I walked the perimeter in my plain jacket garment bag, heavy against my shoulder medals folded inside. Every step echoed off the metal risers as though the ground rehearsed its verdict. Grant's boots sounded before I saw him. He moved without spectacle, his presence drawn tight as a line. In his hand was the folder, sealed, thick weight disproportionate to its paper. He offered it without ceremony, and the edges dug into my palm like a blade sheathed in cardboard. I imagined the photographs inside, commendations bearing signatures, my parents' dismissed endorsements inked in commands Evelyn never earned, moments carved into desert heat and night skies. Proof, not of survival, but of service. He spoke softly, yet his words landed with the certainty of steel. Chain verified. All witnesses accounted for. This is the scaffolding. The stage will hold. I nodded, sliding the folder beneath the garment bag. You know your timing, he added. I answered with a single word. Precise. That was all either of us required. He studied me for a beat, as though measuring not doubt, but resolve. Then, in a motion that compressed years into seconds, he drew himself straight and saluted. Formal, deliberate, a gesture that stripped away secrecy and placed me where I had always stood, even unseen. General, see you on the field. The title carried across the stadium, binding itself to the steel beams and rising banners. When he left, silence filled the vacuum like recognition long overdue. The bleachers creaked behind me. Aunt Rose stepped into the pale light, her shawl drawn close, though the air was not cold. Lines of hesitation traced her face, but her eyes, restless, searched mine. She whispered as though afraid the empty seats could betray her. I can't stay silent anymore. Her words cracked on the final syllable, a fracture of loyalty decades in the making. I steadied her with a hand. You don't need to speak, I said. When I step forward, just don't look away. Her breath caught and she nodded, fragile but certain. Silence I knew could wound, but silence shared could also shield. The sun lifted a fraction, painting the seats in streaks of amber as if warming the jury before its trial. I placed the garment bag across the lowest bench, unzipping it halfway. A glint of ribbon flickered, swallowed again before full light. Tomorrow the cloth would no longer conceal. Tomorrow the fabric of dismissal would rip. I stood at midfield, imagining lines of marchers' applause swells the microphone's electric tremor. All of it mere cover, all of it camouflage for what the field would truly become, terrain marked, measured, and prepared. I inhaled the thin morning air, the taste metallic, the scent faintly of cut grass and oil. Not battlefield smoke, but close enough. The folder pressed against me like a heartbeat. Every endorsement inside every signature, each document was not ink on paper, but testimony carved in silence. Today they hid beneath cloth. Tomorrow they would stand taller than the banners above us. The flags flapped louder as though sensing the shift. I exhaled once, steady, letting breath condense into clarity. Time to let them see what silence has built. Their stage was built for applause, mine was built for judgment. Backstage smelled of starch and polish, an air too clean to hide the nerves pulsing beneath. The green room hummed with preparations, robes swishing cords, coiled staff murmuring into headsets. A dozen mirrors lined the walls, each one reflecting ambition in fragments. Evelyn stood in the center, basking in the quiet spotlight, her robe arranged as though the fabric itself carried destiny. She turned smiling at her own reflection before anyone else. She spoke with the certainty of a queen rehearsing coronation vows. Historic, isn't it? First Whitmore valedictorian in 3 generations. The dean says my words will echo for decades. She adjusted her tassel as though it were a metal, her tone sharp enough to scratch glass. Staff nodded dutifully, their hands busy but their eyes pinned to her orbit. I placed my garment bag against the corner, quiet as stone. Evelyn's words filled the room like perfume, thick and artificial. I let her bask, let her crown herself with expectation. Then, with emotion stripped of ceremony, I set the small case on the table between us. Its hinge clicked softly, a metallic exhale that drew more silence than applause ever could. The bronze star gleamed against the felt dull in the fluorescent light, but heavy with memory. It didn't need introduction. It spoke its own language. Evelyn's laughter caught mid-note, wobbling into a nervous trill. She leaned closer, voice pitched too high to sound steady. "What's this, a souvenir? Something you picked up at an auction?" The staff froze, eyes darting from metal to mirror to me. Dean Walker entered mid-sentence, adjusting his jacket. His glance swept the room, paused at the open case, and something imperceptible shifted in his posture. The dean, a man sculpted in polite indifference, straightened as though the weight of recognition pulled him upright. His words faltered, replaced by a silence thicker than any speech. Evelyn forced a laugh, waving her hand as if brushing off dust. "Novelty piece, right? She has a sense of humor, my sister." But her voice lacked conviction. The edges frayed under the strain. Her fingers twitched at her robe's sash, tightening it as if the fabric could shield her. I didn't move, didn't speak. Silence did the work. The metal lay between us like a verdict wrapped in velvet, needing no jury. The dean's throat cleared, but no words came. His eyes flickered toward me then, away, carrying the weight of something unspoken. Evelyn leaned closer, her whisper sharp, desperate to pierce the quiet. "What are you planning?" I met her gaze, steady as stone. "To let silence answer you." Her breath caught, and for the first time her confidence fractured, not with spectacle, but with the smallest tremor. Staff shuffled their papers faster, pretending busyness, but the air had shifted. Power had tilted, if only by a fraction. The case closed with a soft snap, but the sound echoed louder than Evelyn's practiced boasts. I tucked it under my arm, turning toward the stage corridor. Behind me, her laughter tried to rise again, but it stumbled hollow, stripped of its usual polish. The dean stood rooted, his eyes following his silence, louder than applause. The staff whispered among themselves, unsure if they had just witnessed a gesture or a declaration. Evelyn clutched her robe tighter, her reflection in the mirror, no longer smiling but waiting, fear dressed as composure. As I stepped into the corridor, the building seemed to breathe differently. Not triumphant, not yet, but altered. Beneath the chatter of stagehands and the shuffle of programs, a faint vibration threaded through the air. Subtle at first, then steady, almost musical. Background faint thrum of helicopters unnoticed by most. Ceremonies are like ambushes, you know exactly when the noise will fall. The stadium shimmered under the late May sun banners rippling against a wide blue sky. Families streamed into the bleachers, their voices rising in scattered laughter, the metallic rustle of folding programs keeping rhythm. Cameras jostled for angles, tripods clanking against the concrete steps. A stage stood tall at the field's center, draped in Rivermont colors, microphones glinting like weapons aligned for battle. Evelyn sat at the heart of it, robe spilling across her lap like a conquered flag. She smoothed her hair, her smile calibrated to catch the camera lens at its most flattering angle. Beside her, Charles's chest puffed as though he owned the field itself, Diana's pearls trembling with every approving nod. They radiated pride, the glow of a dynasty polishing itself for public admiration. I slipped into a row near the back, my uniform coat buttoned cap low. The crowd's attention flowed toward the stage, leaving me invisible among them. It was a vantage point I knew too well, observation before strike. My gaze swept over the columns of faculty robes, the journalists testing sound checks, the students shuffling tassels nervously. Beneath the surface cheer, I mapped exits, measured distances, felt the hum of timing tick in my bones. Aunt Rose found her place several rows ahead. She did not look back, but the tilt of her shoulders spoke of unease. She held her program too tightly, Knuckles' pale eyes darting between stage and sky. Dean Walker lingered near the podium, notes in hand, though his gaze kept slipping toward the guest section, toward me. He knew more than he said, and silence held him captive. The ceremony began with formalities, the anthem swelling from brass, the dean's voice steady as he welcomed donors and families. Applause cascaded down the stands, practiced, polite, predictable. Evelyn adjusted her robe again, leaning forward with a composure rehearsed in every mirror. The air sharpened with anticipation, the kind before the first volley. My hand rested on the brim of my cap, steadying against the sun's glare. Around me, families waved flags, children hoisted on shoulders, their laughter piercing through the ceremony's polished weight. The pageantry was flawless, but I could feel the tremor beneath it like loose ground before a charge. Evelyn rose when her name was called, the crowd erupting in pride. Flashbulbs fired, catching her smile, her robe, her gleaming self-image. She stepped to the podium, pausing long enough to bask in applause, meant to crown her. Her eyes scanned the crowd as though the entire stadium belonged to her reflection. I watched silent, every detail sharpening. Her speech sat in her hand, but her voice needed no paper. Arrogance had written the words for her long ago. The dean yielded the microphone. The hush that followed was brittle, waiting to be filled with triumph or mockery. And then, faint but growing, the air trembled. A low vibration threaded through the stadium floor. Programs rattled in restless fingers. Some heads turned puzzled, others oblivious. Evelyn pressed forward, voice rising, eager to cement her dominion before distraction stole her audience. Charles's grin widened. Diana dabbed her eyes, convinced this moment would etch their daughter into legacy. The students shifted uneasily, applause, faltering as the sound above deepened. Cameras tilted upward, lenses hunting the source. The micro-rumble became distinct blades cleaving air. Marine One entered the horizon, green and white body cutting across the sky like a herald. Its engines pulsed over the stadium, drowning part of Evelyn's opening words. Murmurs rippled. The crowd's attention wavered. She gripped the podium tighter, pressing forward with forced brightness, unaware the ground had already shifted beneath her. I gripped my cap, the metal of its emblem hot against my palm. The sky roared, the field held its breath, and every piece fell into place. Let her speak first. Let her choke on her own laughter. She built her throne on laughter. Today, that throne trembled. The stadium had settled into the hush reserved for spectacle, the kind where thousands lean forward as one body. Evelyn stood at the podium, posture sculpted for cameras, her robe catching the light like silk armor. The crowd adored her before she spoke a word. The applause rose in waves, guided by expectation more than merit. She thrived on that current, and I could almost see her drawing breath as though it were hers to command. She began smoothly voice, carrying across microphones and speakers rehearsed rhythm sliding over the bleachers. The speech glittered with practiced lines about vision leadership legacy. Each phrase stacked carefully a tower of self-congratulation that no one dared to question. The dean beamed. The donors clapped with precision. Charles leaned back in his chair, a satisfied monarch surveying his heir. Diana dabbed at her eyes, pearls trembling against her collarbone. Then Evelyn's eyes swept outward, her tone sharpening. There are those, she said with mock sympathy, who choose safe uniforms instead of real impact. Paperwork stamped instead of risks taken. Service that ends at a desk, not at history's table. A ripple of polite laughter followed, thin but audible. My parents joined their mirth, unmistakable. To them, it was truth disguised as wit, the oldest refrain in the house reborn before strangers. She had mocked me in dining rooms and banquets. Now she mocked me on the stage of a university, live-streamed and recorded. I sat steady in the bleachers, hands folded over my cap. The crowd's eyes were fixed on her, but I counted seconds instead of syllables. My pulse did not race. It slowed, deliberate, like the pacing of artillery waiting for the exact interval. The pageantry disguised it, but to me, the ceremony was a battlefield terrain, timing allies, enemies. Evelyn's voice rose, cutting into the sky itself. We are here to celebrate courage, real courage, the kind that builds futures, not files. The applause swelled again. She thrived on it, emboldened, her crown woven from sound. Every clap was a nail she thought sealed my coffin. And then the rumble returned. At first faint, a vibration stitched into the air like a distant storm. I felt it through the soles of my boots before the audience heard it. Heads turned upward, puzzled. Programs fluttered. The air itself seemed to thicken. Evelyn pressed on, volume climbing to drown the disturbance. But the microphones betrayed her. The low thunder grew louder, stealing her stage line by line. Cameras swiveled, journalists abandoning her face for the horizon. She faltered just slightly, but enough for the words to stutter. Marine One crested the line of bleachers, its body gleaming against the morning sun. The engines poured sound into the stadium, drowning laughter, tearing through applause. Students rose from their seats, confusion spreading like fire. Murmurs echoed. Some shaded their eyes, pointing. The speech was no longer the center. Evelyn clutched the podium tighter, her knuckles white beneath her robe's sleeve. Her mouth moved, but her words scattered under the rotor wash. The throne she built from mockery now rattled, trembling under a sky that no longer belonged to her voice. Charles's confident smile collapsed into strain. Diana's hand froze at her throat. Donors whispered urgently, sensing the narrative slipping. Aunt Rose leaned forward, lips pressed tight, the weight of years of silence pressing against her chest. On the stage, Evelyn tried to recover, but each sentence cracked under the roar. She was no longer speaking to the world, she was shouting into wind, unheard. And still I sat calm, measuring the seconds steady, as if watching artillery land where it was always meant to. In my ear, the channel clicked alive, precise, professional. Grant's voice cut through the storm. On your word. Noise filled the stadium, but the loudest sound was Evelyn's silence. Marine One's downdraft shredded the light. Flags snapped. Programs skittered along the aisles. The microphone stuttered and surrendered. The field held its breath. I moved. Grant stood at the dais edge, one finger raised, not for drama, for timing. The honor guard captain read the signal like a C. A hand chopped a command, split the air, and 500 Marines rose in a blade-clean motion. Benches trembled. The sound that followed was not noise. It was order assembling itself. The crowd froze, then swiveled. Some reached for phones, others for certainty. Dean Walker's instinct outran his training. His right hand lifted, searching for a star to answer. It found me before his eyes did. His salute caught him by surprise. The truth, when it finally enters a room, often does. I stepped from the aisle and took the stairs, each riser a rung in a ladder I had climbed for 20 years without witnesses. My coat held to my frame like a seal. Below me, my parents sat, stunned Charles with a half smile he could not finish, Diana with her fingertips at her pearls as if pulse could be reasoned with. Wind braided my hair against my neck. Aunt Rose did not blink. Students swayed to the rotor's cadence. Cameras found me and forgot why they'd ever looked elsewhere. I reached the lectern's shadow, paused for the field to hear its heartbeat, and shrugged the coat from my shoulders. Cloth fell. Light struck metal. 4 stars, quiet as winter and bright as noon, fixed where anyone could see what they had refused to know. A murmur began like rain and became something else: recognition. Dean Walker's salute snapped to attention. A lieutenant echoed him. Rose rippled. The hush that followed grew until it dwarfed the aircraft. Out near the numbers, Grant faced the Marines. Prepare to render, he called, and the formation recalibrated as effortlessly as breath. The microphone's mouth was open, but it had nothing to teach the moment. Command does not require amplification. It requires witnesses. I did not look at Evelyn, but I felt her presence buckle beside me. Gravity reversed. The podium had been her mirror. Now it became a measuring stick. Her confidence, which fed on applause, found no air. She gathered her note cards as if their corners could cut a path back to the story she owned. A boy near the front stood. Others followed, not sure why, only that their bodies recognized a drill they had never learned. Diana's lips formed an unvoiced question. Charles tried a smile and found it did not fit the new weather. Grant's arm cut down. The Marine's salute fired like a single chord. General on deck. The words detonated and then organized the silence that remained. It stretched to the rafters and pressed into the earth. Even the helicopter seemed to hover inside it, an animal tamed by a raised hand. I faced the faces and did what I had come to do: nothing. Authority filled the absence. The stadium, a courtroom without walls, listened to the fact of rank, the way a shoreline listens to tide, not as opinion, as physics. Somewhere a camera tightened its shot. Somewhere a commentator whispered the name they had not been given. Dean Walker recovered first. His voice, when he found it, was smaller than the moment. "General," he said, and the word went out like a bell. I nodded once. Not for him, but for the witnesses the day required. At the edge of my vision, Aunt Rose stood stone still, finally unafraid to see. I let the coat hang over my arm. I let the stage show what it had hidden. I let Evelyn hear the one thing she had never allowed for anyone else: silence that does not obey her. So, Evelyn drops her speech cards, frozen. I whisper internally, "Judgment begins." The salute cracked like thunder, yet what followed was heavier silence that no one dared break. Marine One idled like a caged storm beyond the bleachers' rotor wash, tugging at banners and tassels. The Marines held their salute, a wall of raised hands cutting a bright angle through the air. Sound ebbed. Dust settled. The stadium leaned toward stillness the way a jury leans toward a verdict. I could feel the weight of it in the tendons of my wrist, in the steadiness of my breath, in the way the microphone, suddenly obedient, kept its mouth shut. Dean Walker edged forward until his shoes met the taped mark, the paper in his hand trembling. Cameras shivered with him, red lights blinking like small nervous hearts. He looked at me, and then past me as if the name were waiting somewhere above the field, and he had only to fetch it. When he found his voice, it was careful, reverent, a man discovering he has been speaking the preface to another book all along. "Ladies and gentlemen, General Victoria Hale." Flashes detonated. The crowd's confusion, clapping, stopping, whispering, collapsed into awe. You can hear awe when a place breathes in but never exhales. A girl near the front covered her mouth with both hands. An alumnus removed his cap. Somewhere a child asked why everyone had frozen, and no one answered, because we were inside a moment that refused casual language. Beside me, Evelyn tried to compose herself within the outline of her robe. The podium had been her mirror. It gave no reflection now. She opened her mouth closed, it offered the husk of a laugh, then reached for dignity with fingers that would not steady. Ah, this is, she began, but the sentence arrived without a spine. The silence took it away. On the jumbotron, my parents' faces appeared caught, unprepared, enlarged into honesty. Charles searched the crowd for a cue he could master. Finding none, his smile faltered into the truth of not knowing. Diana's hand flew to her pearls as though they might turn the clock a year, a decade. Aunt Rose stood very still. Chin lifted, the lines beside her mouth deepening into something like relief. Grant remained at formation's edge, a fixed star in a sky that had just remembered its constellations. The Marines did not move. Their salute became a kind of architecture around which the moment built itself. The students, restless seconds ago, settled as if learning a new gravity. I let the quiet expand. There are words that serve a purpose. There are also silences that complete the work. Dean lowered his sheet. The announcer, finally understanding, said nothing. A breeze found the edge of the flag and worried it, then gave up. I felt the coat's weight across my arm and the old ache in my shoulder where years had made their mark. I did not offer biography. I did not defend a ledger. I had brought only fact, and fact is heavier than speech. Evelyn tried again, a small sound that could have been a plea or a protest. It drifted a foot and died. She had built a throne with laughter. The throne did not hold. The cameras, disloyal to narratives, clung to my face, then to the stars at my collar, then to the formation that would not tremble. This, then, was the courtroom without walls I had walked toward for so long. No judge, no gavel, only witnesses and truth, sufficient unto itself. A cadet in the third row of the honor block blinked hard and raised his hand a fraction higher. The motion rippled outward until the line was perfect. Grant watched me without asking. The field waited. I raised my right hand and returned the salute. No words, no flourish. The gesture met theirs in the air and closed the circuit. The sound that followed was not sound at all, but weight, history settling into place, the crowd consenting to what it already knew. The helicopter idled inside the hush like a beast soothed by the palm of a handler. In that stillness, I felt the edges of years softening the ledger, clearing the balance, corrected not by argument, but by presence. I let my hand fall. I neither reached for the microphone nor surrendered the stage. I stood, and by standing, I answered. Around me, breath resumed in small, careful increments. Someone in the press pen lowered his camera and simply looked, unmediated by glass. A faculty robe brushed my sleeve and withdrew. The wind turned once, reconsidered, and stilled. Evelyn's lips moved the tiniest motion. This isn't over. Some downfalls are gentle slips. Hers was a free fall with cameras watching. The reception hall tried to be celebratory, white linens and a string quartet, but the air carried the hush of something broken. Live feeds washed the walls blue. My coat lay over my arm. The stars at my collar did the talking. Evelyn carved through donors and faculty and stopped inches from me, fury lacquered as poise. You planned this circus. The words cracked like glass. Microphones converged booms. Phones the red eye of a lens I could have touched. I didn't move. Cameras aren't my department, I said. Truth is. Charles hovered, color draining. Diana clutched pearls as if touch could fix pulse. Dean Walker stood a pace away, hostage to what arrived. Grant waited at an angle, not blocking, not inviting there. Evelyn spun to the press, summoning her trained smile. My sister ambushed a family celebration, she announced. She staged a flyover to humiliate me. Before I could decide to answer, a thinner, braver voice cut the room. It wasn't Victoria who lied. It was you. Aunt Rose stepped from the edge, shawl clenched in one fist to the other, holding a manila envelope that weighed more. Her eyes did not. You opened accounts using our name. You signed letters as if you sat on the Whitmore board. You promised internships that didn't exist and took donations into a shell. Evelyn laughed too quickly. She's confused. Rose tore the seal. Pages slid like a confession. Emails, letterhead contracts. Deposits that didn't match scholarships. A consulting agreement with a forged title, Evelyn as strategic director of a fund that never existed. Dates, amounts, signatures I knew too well. Zoom on, that someone whispered. Screens behind the bar split the document, enlarged on one side, Evelyn's face on the other. The hush deepened. You can manufacture papers, Evelyn said, reaching for outrage as if it were rope. None of this is, Grant spoke once, and a watermark bloomed at the corner of the projection, pulled from servers by subpoena, time-stamped by the university's own IT. Donors stared at their shoes. Diana's mouth formed my name and refused to release it. Evelyn lunged toward Rose. I stepped between. Don't, I said. The microphones caught the word and made it a wall. On screen, the email thread unspooled, Evelyn coaching a student to route funds temporarily to a personal account. A vendor asking when the Whitmore Foundation would pay for an event it had never sponsored. A forward from my mother boasting about Evelyn's foundation work, the lie wrapped in pride. This is a smear, Evelyn yelled, the edges fraying. You're jealous, Victoria. You always have been. I didn't feed the cameras. Integrity doesn't need applause, I said. It needs records. I turned to Rose. May I? She handed me the stack. The screen stitched the evidence into a sequence even the indifferent could follow. Account numbers. Wire slips, the same looping signature again and again. Dates matched fundraising dinners. Evelyn's travel dress fittings I remembered from receipts on the kitchen counter. The crowd gasped in waves like a coastline learning a storm. Everyone does introductions favors, Evelyn tried. Introductions don't carry wire instructions, I said. She pivoted to my parents. Tell them, she pleaded. Tell them I was helping the family. Charles reached and missed. Diana stepped and found the floor had moved. A final slide filled the screens, a signed pledge tying Evelyn's foundation to a vendor who kicked back 10% to a private account. Printed name, signature, initials at the margins. Sound left her. She screamed no, but the word cracked and broke before it reached the mics. Someone muted the room's speakers and heard only breath. I stood still. Not triumph, not vengeance, only relief, as the ledger balanced at last. Around us, the public judged. A reporter elbowed to the front, voice sharp enough to cut. General Hale, do you intend to press charges? She once lived for applause. Now, even silence abandoned her. Evening fell over the estate like a heavy robe no one wanted. Banners from the ceremony lay bruised by the door. Portraits watched without confidence. I set my coat on the newel and entered the sitting room, where lamps burned too bright. A black sedan idled outside, then another. Two lawyers crossed the threshold with leather cases and the vocabulary of consequence. Behind them came board representatives I knew from fundraisers, faces drained of donor warmth. Cards became documents. Sympathy became service of process. One word drifted through the parlor and found every ear. Fraud. Evelyn stood by the mantel, still in robe and makeup, an image cracking at the edges. This is a misunderstanding, she told the paperwork. My foundation work. There is no foundation, a lawyer said gently, which landed harder than anger. He set the envelope by a crystal bowl that scattered the summons into shards of light. Charles and Diana withdrew to the study and closed the door with the soft urgency of people drafting a story. Their voices rose and fell. I didn't listen. Some verdicts deliver themselves. Aunt Rose patted the cushion beside her. We sat shoulder to shoulder, two women finished with pretending the wallpaper was beautiful. I'm sorry it took me so long, she said. You came when it mattered, I answered. In the hall, the lawyers finished dates, obligations, the dull arithmetic of accountability. Shoes crossed stone. Engines receded. The house exhaled. Evelyn turned on me. Rage fit her like a borrowed gown. You ruined me. No, I said truth, settling like a book on its shelf. You did. She flinched not from volume but accuracy. The silence that once adored her stepped back. The study door opened. My parents emerged with faces arranged for public tragedy. Charles cleared his throat, the old signal for attention, and found none. He looked at me like a man facing a compass after walking in circles. Victoria, he managed brittle didn't understand. Diana reached for his sleeve and missed. Pride had been her proof. Tonight, the math failed. Across the rug, Aunt Rose folded her hands. Calm poured into the space between sentences. Evelyn waited for rescue. None came. She seemed to shrink inside the robe costume without power. Charles's voice let go of its last defense. We were wrong to mock you, Victoria. He said it to the carpet first, then to me. Not eloquent, true. I nodded once. Enough. Diana tried again. We will make statements, she said weakly, as if press releases could repair architecture. We can correct impressions. Impressions follow actions, I said. Not the other way around. Wind moved in the eaves. The house felt like a courtroom again, not by declaration, but by evidence taking a seat. Juries can be small sometimes, 3 frightened people beneath their own portraits. Aunt Rose leaned on my shoulder, the quietest victory I had ever seen. You can rest now, she whispered. Soon, I said. Headlights swept the windows as a car turned in. Evelyn jerked as if struck, grabbed a bag with hands that wouldn't obey. She passed me a gust of perfume and panic. I did not think cruelty. I thought record. She once lived for applause. Now even silence abandoned her. The door slammed. Gravel spat. In the glass, I saw her stride to the car, braid loosening, breath white in the cooling air. She fumbled keys, slid in, stabbed the ignition. As the engine coughed alive, the lawyer's taillights painted the hedges red, then faded. In the hall, a portrait's glass vibrated from the door's slam. Somewhere, a clock resumed its slow tick, impartial as rain, counting what could not be undone. Evelyn storms out into night, headlights flashing on her tears. Victory isn't loud. It's the quiet rebuilding when the fire has burned everything false. Memorial Day lay over Arlington like a steady hand. Flags drew crisp lines against a rinsed blue sky. White markers stepped down the hill in flawless ranks. No chandeliers, no donors, only stone grass and a wind that asked for posture. The hill's hush pressed the city to the edge of hearing. We formed near the plaza. Cadets stood a fraction taller than their uniforms. Fellow officers took their places without noise. Grant found the space at my shoulder a mentor keeps. He didn't speak my name. Aunt Rose arrived in a simple dress and a face washed of pretense, the last of her excuses folded away. When the color guard advanced, conversation thinned to breath. I carried the wreath in both hands, ribbon brushing my knuckles, and led toward Section 60, where my first commander rested. In winter, he once told me, make the plan, then make it quieter. Quieter is stronger. He never asked to be seen. He asked me to be accurate. We halted. Stone met light. I set the wreath and let my fingertips learn the cool of his name. Aunt Rose leaned close and whispered to the ground. I'm sorry I let them talk over you. Wind took it and filed it where such things are kept. Grant's shadow crossed mine. The world finally sees you as I always did. He said low enough to belong to the earth. I answered with a nod and faced the flag as the bugle found the notes that close a throat before they open a memory. Old footage tried to intrude the banquet glass, the practiced grin, but it guttered here. Dignity felt different in this light. It had weight, not volume. The cadets watched sequence, not celebrity, learning that stillness is a language. After the benediction, we moved in careful lines. Aunt Rose held my hand properly, the first time since childhood. I will testify if they ask, she said. I will say what I saw and what I pretended not to. I squeezed back. We were done performing. Truth didn't need volume today. It needed room. Down the slope, two familiar silhouettes paused in crabapple shade my parents, close enough to see, far enough to fail approach. Charles's suit looked borrowed. Diana's pearls had lost their script. I did not wave. I didn't turn away either. The choice to stand apart had always been theirs. Aunt Rose stepped to my right shoulder aligned, while the honor guard lifted the flag and folded it, edge exact corners kissed, returning meaning to motion. A standard, not a show. Flashbacks sparked the shattered glass, the microphone smirked the rotor wash that tore a false story loose, and then receded into place. What stayed was the sound of synchronized steps, elbows locking, a trumpet stitching air into a single continuous thread. My breathing matched it. A plan ends. A standard remains. A cadet jogged up, breath pinned, salute crisp. Ma'am. Nothing else. Enough. When he fell back into formation, I realized I wasn't bracing for the next dismissal. I was simply standing on ground that did not argue with me. We sat for a while on a low wall and watched shadows shorten and grow honest again. The city hummed somewhere indifferent. I let the past shelve itself, accessible, indexed, no longer in charge. Names around us kept vigil without needing witnesses. From the crest, the cemetery widened until it taught. Lives given. Names kept. Not a throne, not a stage. A ledger cut in stone, balanced by witness, not noise. The day read not as triumph, but as repair. My parents drifted away along a side path, still unspeaking. Grant returned long enough to tip two fingers, something between salute and farewell. Keep the standard, he said. The rest follows. He left as the flag brightened once, then settled back into stillness. The breeze answered yes. It felt earned at last. And quiet, I closed my eyes. Justice was never applause. It was silence. They once erased me with silence now. Silence was the proof I had won. The courthouse steps burned white beneath early June sun. Reporters pressed against barricades, microphones craning like bayonets, cameras already humming with verdicts of their own. The double doors swung open and agents flanked Evelyn, her wrists wrapped in steel. She looked smaller than the robe she wore at Rivermont, smaller than the speeches she once rehearsed into mirrors. The crowd shouted questions, but she kept her head low, voice swallowed by chains. Inside, the judge's voice had cut precise, guilty on all counts of fraud. Assets seized. Term of custody to commence immediately. No room for applause, no room for doubt. The gavel had not thundered, it had whispered, and that whisper carried farther than her laughter ever had. I stepped out after her, Bronze Star case in hand, uniform pressed by quiet instead of applause. Reporters surged closer. General, hail any statement. How does it feel, your own sister sentenced? Will you respond to her accusations of conspiracy? Their questions snapped like gunfire designed to wound, to force a sound. I gave them none. Instead, I lifted the Bronze Star high enough for cameras to catch. Metal kissed sunlight, etching reflection into every lens. No words followed, no explanation, no vindication, just silence. The noise faltered. First one microphone lowered, then another. Shouts thinned to whispers, then nothing at all. The only sound left was the clock tower striking the hour and the steady rustle of flags on the courthouse lawn. Even the city beyond seemed to pause, traffic stilled in reverence or confusion. Flashbulbs burst in rhythm, but the air itself stayed mute. That quiet became the verdict. Behind me, Aunt Rose stood straighter than I had ever seen her. She didn't need to speak either. Her presence was enough, her silence aligned with mine. On the far side of the barricade, Charles and Diana avoided the cameras, their shame unshielded. They too had been sentenced not by law but by history's refusal to applaud. The next morning, headlines wrapped every stand, the general who answered with silence. Subheads stretched beneath, Bronze Star raised, no words given. The photographs carried more weight than 1,000 sound bites. Across the nation, classrooms pinned that image beside faded war posters. Offices replayed the footage during lunch, Cadets studied the moment as doctrine. Evelyn's name threaded the indictments. Mine threaded the silence. I walked down the steps not with triumph, but with steadiness. Reporters still lingered waiting for one final sentence, but the quiet had already spoken louder than anything I could offer. I kept the medal raised until the last camera shutter closed, then lowered it gently as if returning it to the soil that had grown me. This was never about applause. It was never about winning arguments at tables where I was unwelcome. It was about letting silence weigh what laughter had once distorted. As I reached the street, I looked once at the courthouse doors closing behind Evelyn. Agents guided her through, head still bowed, voice still absent. For the first time, she knew what it meant to be erased not by mockery, but by quiet that told the truth too plainly to be denied. I breathed deep, the air tasting of summer and closure. The world had shifted without a speech. My vow from the first night at the Whitmore table had reached its end. My story didn't end with applause, I told myself, stepping into the crowd's hush. It ended with quiet, and quiet was enough. To everyone who has followed my story, I ask you to see not just the uniform or the medal, but the silence I chose. It is easy to lash out when mocked, to answer cruelty with words sharper than the wound. But I stood still, letting silence speak for me. Support me not because I triumphed, but because I endured. Mockery never defined me, discipline did. If you carry scars from being underestimated, know this: you do not need applause to prove worth. Sometimes the most powerful answer to betrayal is quiet resolve. Let silence write your justice.